So we're really excited to talk with everyone today about insights into tracking and measuring for augmented and virtual reality. Here at Tipping Point, augmented reality and virtual reality are, a really popular solution with a lot of our clients right now. And, we're constantly getting asked, how do we go about tracking? What can we track? And, in today's session, we're going to be discussing the current landscape, what can be tracked in these solutions, and what are the values of tracking in augmented and virtual reality. Plus, we're going to go over some real world use cases that we've had here at Tipping Point. Okay, so those who may not be familiar.
I'm going to jump in for 1 second. Lindsay, we are seeing, I apologize, folks. Lindsay, we are seeing your control panel. If I could ask you to close down, if you could hit that orange button in the top left corner. There you go. Sorry about that, folks.
No problem. Are we good, Tim?
Absolutely, yeah, good to go. It's a perfect view now. Thank you.
Okay. So those who may not be familiar with Tipping Point, we'll start us off with a little bit of background information. So we've been in business now for over 17 years. Now we are focused in on training and marketing in the life sciences. I would say at any given time, we are about 70-30 training versus marketing. But really at the end of the day, we're really all about education. And we're getting known for being that really highly innovative company that's utilizing some of the latest, greatest technologies like augmented and virtual reality. But for us here at Tipping Point, augmented and virtual reality, mixed reality solutions, that's not the flavor of the month for us. We've been designing augmented and virtual reality solutions for about 8 years now, which means that we have a lot of experience here on our staff. We've got about a little over 40 people on staff. And the makeup of that staff is also unique in the sense that we do have 3D medically certified animators on staff, allows us to keep everything very highly medically accurate, move through things like med legal easier. And there's another key point that Tipping Point really differentiates itself, and that is through the use of a really high level instructional designers. I think when you start to compare augmented and virtual reality solution providers, you start to notice that a lot of the heavy lifting is done with other organizations with game designers, and game designers are great around creating the neuroscience of gaming, make it fun, make it repetitive. But Tipping Point puts a really strong emphasis on our instructional designers because we're never going to rely on the technology alone to get that desired outcome, to the point of which that we hire PhD and master level instructional designers. And that formula of really that deep understanding of the science along with sound strategic approach has really allowed us to be successful over the years, winning over 60 different awards just in the last few years for design, education, and innovation. And some of the most recent awards that we won was last year's L10 Excellence Award for content. Pat's going to talk about that project here a little bit more, a virtual reality project that we've created that has had a lot of success. We're also a fast growing company. Tipping Point's been named to Inc.'s 5,000 fastest growing. And for the third year in a row, we've won a Brendan Hall Gold Award for a virtual reality project that we've created. So now that we got this to get a little bit of background information on Tipping Point, we're gonna do a quick round of introductions to our team and who's gonna be talking today. So for those who may not be familiar with me, my name is Sean Purcell. I'm Director of Business Development here at Tipping Point. Got about 6 years with the company and about 14 years in pharma and the life sciences. So Pat, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Sure, thanks Sean. Hi everybody, my name is Patrick Lenahan and I'm the Director of Campus Integration here at Tipping Point. I've been with the company for over 12 years and have 13 years of application design, development, and production experience. Evan?
Hey everyone, my name is Evan Yeager and I'm one of the solution strategists at Tipping Point Media. I joined Tipping Point in August of 2020 and I have been working in technology sales for 3 years. I'll be kicking off today's presentation by talking about the current climate of LMS tracking and AR and VR. I just want to get started with our presentation today by identifying the current landscape of learning management, and more specifically, the intersectionality of augmented and virtual reality. Today, the educational uses of AR and VR are expanding exponentially. It was actually predicted back in 2019 that in less than a decade, around 23 million jobs would be using AR or VR in some capacity. And this didn't even account for the rapid transition that we're now seeing to AR and VR as a result of the pandemic. It's also understood that developing experiential learning in AR and VR increases learning retention, and that's by a staggering 90%. That's why it's so important that you want to be able to measure a learner's experience in AR and VR. Current learning management systems are designed to capture and report data that offers insights into the retention of learning that's being delivered. And most learning management systems, or LMSs, perform a list of core functions, but to break it down very quickly, they should document the learning that occurs, track basic progress and completion metrics of that learning, offer objective and subjective reporting for developing those data-backed insights. They should help with automatically building those reports based off of preset criteria. In some cases, they actually can launch and deliver the content for learners. And finally, you want it to be able to tackle the administrative burden of tracking who completed what and when. That leads us to our next question. So although modern learning management systems are extremely robust in terms of out-of-the-box features, there's a lot of room for improvement with reporting and tracking. And these are some of the common pain points where LMSs may fall short. The comments that you're seeing on the screen are actually out of reviews that we have pulled from the most widely used LMSs. Complex learning indicators, assessment capabilities, and customizing reports are really common pain points that can be felt regardless of the size, scope, or expense of your LMS. And it's an unfortunate reality that even the most sophisticated LMSs suffer from not being able to track every type of training that your organization might offer. When you're examining what exactly can be measured within your system, it's an important step to identifying the possible deficits that might be present in your current tracking process. So very quickly, I just want to take a break for a moment here and ask a question to the room around what types of training that your organization offers. And with that, what types of information that you are currently tracking.
Hi, Patrick. It looks like the results are almost all in. I'm sorry, that was Evan. It looks like the results are almost all in.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Folks, if you are making your choices, you can just wrap up your choice here. I'll close off the poll and we'll share the results with the room. Great, everybody. Thanks so much for sharing with us. And here are the results.
Okay, so that's a pretty standard type of response that we were really kind of expecting to get here. Most of our clients kind of go through that crawl, walk, run phase when they're implementing things like augmented and virtual reality, and that's pretty typical. What we see is, some of our clients that are coming in are really looking at things like completion rate, assessment scores, to get started. And then as their programs begin to grow and they develop over time, we oftentimes are seeing clients adding more things like decision points, branching logic tracking, and experiential data. Certainly now, just within the last year, this has been kind of shifted a little bit. Given the current circumstance of COVID and having some challenges of in-person training, a lot of our clients are shifting to that experiential data and starting with it really kind of right out of the gate because it gives you that type of real world feedback. So yeah, thank you everyone for participating, and this is good information.
Yeah, thanks again everyone for your responses. And I just want to hammer home the point that tracking is an extremely vital practice for developing training and education that gives you those reliable and predictable results and retention. So because AR and VR utilize experiential learning, there's actually a plethora of relevant user data that can be tracked and measured. Almost everything can be tracked within an experience. And then you can take that information to draw insights such as baseline assumptions like Is this training increasing retention in our learners, or is it not? And then use those insights from the data to revise your training in a strategic and precise manner. Because AR and VR organically captures this data already, tracking movement can look at extremely granular measurements, like normal movements such as how a learner is interacting with specific objects within an experience. And this means that you're able to see metrics on individual interactions. For instance, maneuvering the view of a specific body part, such as an eyeball. Tracking movement also means that you can identify objects of interest to a learner, and that can give you data on what is possibly being ignored and what objects they are developing or devoting more time to. Being able to track movement means answering the question, how does the learner move around that space? For instance, where are they starting in an experience and how are they navigating? Perhaps one of the more telling conclusions that you're able to derive about your learners is answering the question, are they comfortable with the technology? We can dive a little bit deeper into this when we look at something called tracking haptics. So progress and completion tracking shares its roots with the data that is typically available on a learning management system. And that's usually one of the first data points that instructors and stakeholders want to take a look at. At the very least, it should define who completed the training and who did not complete the training. With AR and VR tracking, you're able to look at more than just completion. For example, you are able to measure and report on how many times or attempts that it took a learner to finish an experience, and you can look at how many times a learner may have replayed a particular part of the experience or the time spent on a particular section. When designing virtual reality, we utilize this information to get a benchmark for how long we can make an experience where the user is still engaged and it is not overwhelming, especially when designing perspective training, where a learner steps into the shoes of a patient and experiences symptoms like blurry vision. This data can be used to identify where learners are struggling and can even be broken down to look at individual concepts that need to be reinforced. In the larger picture, this gives you the insight into the effectiveness of the training being delivered. You can just go to haptics there. Sorry about that. Movement tracking can also be used to look at individual learner haptics. This is how the learner reacts to individual sensory experiences, like, for instance, picking up an object or performing manual tasks within AR or VR. We've employed haptic feedback in many medical device simulations where part of the device that needs to be pushed a specific distance and locked into place. If you go too far or not far enough, that part does not lock into place and you have not completed the experience. In one project we did for a medical device company, the user was tasked with rotating the device into the proper position to inflate a cryoablation balloon. This helped to develop the user's understanding of how to use the device properly and train the muscle memory and association with the device. Measuring those haptics can give you valuable data such as the proprioception or body and position awareness of your learners within an experience. When you're employing and tracking haptics, it's very valuable for developing or retraining muscle memory. I just want to get the presentation over to Pat to delve into the behavior side of things that can be tracked within augmented and virtual reality.
Thanks, Evan. So we've just talked about some standard tracking in AR and VR, as well as how we can best track your learners are moving around in their virtual space. But what are the other aspects of learner performance within a virtual training experience, like their behaviors? What can their words, eye movements, and decisions tell us about their experience in the virtual training? Some of you have probably interacted with some form of voice recognition at some point in the past few days. Has anyone asked Siri to respond to a text message? Maybe you've asked Alexa to play your favorite radio station. The point is, we've all experienced voice recognition in our everyday lives at some point. But now ask yourself, have you ever interacted with voice recognition in your training? Some of you may say yes, but most of you are probably shaking your head no. Voice recognition can be a very immersive and engaging component when implemented into your training. For example, using voice recognition, your learners can practice the correct delivery to handle an objection with an artificial intelligent position rather than just reading text and selecting the best option by tapping a button. Voice recognition can also listen for keywords in order to determine how appropriate a response is or not. More advanced voice recognition applications can pose a different response based on how appropriate the learner's initial response is. Voice recognition can also be a more natural method for practicing soft skills or simulating conversations, which can better prepare learners for real-world simulations. So voice recognition is one behavioral method that can be tracked and leveraged. But what about where your learners are looking? So let's take a look at gaze and haptic, or gaze and eye tracking. So in addition to voice recognition, gaze tracking or eye tracking can provide valuable insights into what your learners are paying attention to or what details they are overlooking during a virtual training experience. Whether it's a medical procedure simulation, a research and development industrial process, or a virtual safety training exercise, knowing where your learners are looking is key to assessing their engagement with their training experiences. One of the most effective ways to visualize this type of data is with a heat map. A heat map is essentially an overlay on your virtual environment that displays areas where your learners are focusing their attention the most, shown in red, warmer colors, and where they're giving less attention, cooler or no colors. Heat maps can tell you if your learners are noticing the most important elements in an experience or if they are taking the time to observe the entirety of their virtual environment around them. This becomes important for safety or industrial process training experiences where learners need to identify any potential hazards present or ensure that a workstation is properly configured. Heat maps can also evaluate soft skills development, such as public speaking, by displaying where learners are looking during their speaking exercises, so they can improve things like eye contact or engaging with their audience, even if it is just an AI position on a sales call. Gaze tracking and heat maps can also help translate what decisions learners are making in their training experiences. So let's talk about some decision making next. When we talk about decision making, it's more than just correct and incorrect answers. We're talking about the choices that learners are making in their training experiences at key decision points, and if those decisions are leading to the desired training outcomes. Branching logic scenarios are a great tool to capture learner decisions. These scenarios can come in multiple forms, from selling simulations to ordered step processes, where the learner needs to make informed decisions through critical thinking to complete the training successfully and achieve the desired training outcomes. Branching logic scenarios also offer the learner multiple paths to different outcomes, so that each time they go through the scenario, the final outcome may be different based on the choices they make. By tracking the decisions being made, you can determine if there are any trends in learner responses that may point to users consistently achieving an undesirable outcome after a certain decision point. That decision point can then be analyzed to determine why learners are making one decision over another. Is the question vaguely phrased, or are the available options too similar? This type of analysis, combined with the captured data, becomes a teachable moment for learners who can be instructed on the proper decision to correct their behavior and achieve the desired training outcomes. So we can see that tracking and measuring different types of learner behavior can provide a detailed understanding of how learners are interacting with their training and their training environment, and how that interaction can have a positive effect on achieving their training objectives. In addition to some of the behavioral tracking we've been discussing, some of the newer and more experimental forms of tracking go even more in depth to track how your learners are responding to content. So let's take a closer look on the next slide. We've talked a lot about the tangible aspects of what we can track and measure, but what about things that aren't as obvious? Things like heart rate, blood pressure, or even respiration. While this type of data is largely being tracked and collected live through wearables such as the Apple Watch, Fitbit, or any number of other devices on the market, we don't usually see vital sign monitoring in training very often. Mixed and augmented reality has seen some advancements in vital sign tracking over the past few years in the medical field. The Microsoft HoloLens, for example, has been leveraged to develop software called the CardioLens, which essentially lets the wearer of the HoloLens monitor the heart rate of someone just by looking at their face. So imagine being a manager conducting a role play training scenario and seeing a sales rep's heart rate jump up when you present them with an objection they aren't fully prepared to respond to. It would make for a pretty powerful assessment tool and coaching moment for you and your rep. By tracking these vital sign spikes, the trainer can better work with the sales rep to overcome their stumbling blocks without the risk of performing poorly in a real-world scenario. Another interesting application of tracking and measuring these vital signs is happening in the psychological research studying phobias and anxieties. During these studies, patients wear a VR headset and attach a wearable device to monitor their heart rate. Once they put the headset on, they're transported to a virtual environment that may make them uncomfortable or afraid, and they're monitored for their response. Heart rate and blood pressure elevate, and their overall response is measured against their baseline. However, since this is a virtual setting, there's limited risk or exposure to the harmful stimuli. So with repeated virtual treatment, the users become more and more comfortable with the phobia or anxiety, and the negative response is ultimately lessened over time. So if we apply this to a virtual training scenario, such as a medical procedure, we would be able to monitor a learner going through the procedure and watching for when their heart rate spikes. For example, right before they may have to make an incision or other critical step in the procedure, we can then correlate their performance in the training scenario with the elevation of their vital signs. So prior to making the incision, we saw a spike in the learner's heart rate. And then in the tracked engagement data for that step, we would see that it was not performed correctly or wasn't as accurate as maybe it needs to be. So by tracking where these vital signs spike and how they relate to performance, a trainer can better work with the learner to identify the areas where they're performing poorly and work to correct their behavior. So over the past few slides, we've talked a lot about what can be tracked and some of the scenarios where we can apply these metrics to, but what can we gain by tracking all of this data? I'm going to hand it over to Sean to talk about some of those insights.
All right, thank you, Patrick. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about the value of augmented and virtual reality analytics. You know, as you heard, there's a ton of new ways to track each rep's experience in virtual and augmented reality. And our tracking really allows the learners to see how they're performing at a deep personalized level. The learner is able to identify key areas for remediation and additional training based on real-world application. Things like body posture, heat map tracking, it really help the learner understand not only of their, oh, I've got it. Okay. Sorry about that. So I lost connection. Can everyone hear me?
Sean, I can still hear you, yes.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I just got a big error that jumped up on my screen and said you lost connection. Okay. So yeah, it's really creating these real world scenarios that allows for learners to see the results in a safe space and where they can really explore situational environments and really recreate scenarios to find their best possible outcomes. And this is huge because it gives the rep the opportunity to explore their training without having that anxiety of doing that type of in-person practicing. I mean, you don't need to go into cafe form and understand things like rep ride-alongs and role play scenarios can be really stressful for reps. Them now having the ability and learners the ability to go back in and go through these open play experiences allows for a fluid learner experience where behavioral patterns can really develop. And as we track these patterns, reps can then begin to mold the real world skills and performance while continually receiving direction for improvement. And it's that 360 degrees of feedback in a safe environment that really encourages that learner to keep practicing and keep going through these different scenarios to find that best possible outcome. And for example, in sales and MSL training, using branching logic while in virtual reality has really allowed our learners the ability to go through and explore things like their responses, interactions, work on things like their soft selling skills. in order to find that best possible outcome. And the tracking information that's coming from augmented and virtual reality really allows the learner to be really fully prepared for every aspect of what that task could be, or sales process. And it's this type of individual centric approach that our trainees really love. So now let's discuss the value then to the managers as well. So things like improving retention, implementing behavioral changes, and closing learning gaps can all be achieved through a thoughtful pre-planning phase. And it doesn't matter really who you're going with in terms of your vendor. Just make sure you're spending that upfront time in determining your goals, because this is really going to help allow the tracking to align with all of your training goals and also their real world applications. It's really going to allow the trainers and stakeholders to create things like scorecards for each learner so that they're getting that focused type of training, and so that they're able to optimize their training and ultimately get those exact results that we're looking to achieve. And because augmented and virtual reality can recreate these real world exercises, it provides the trainers the ability to track their teams individually and as groups, so that we know that they're hitting on all their KPIs as if it's that kind of real world experience. And the best part is that you're able to gather this data without having to have the managers hovering over tops of representatives, which given the current landscape can provide invaluable information on what's taking place in their training. Especially with everything that's going on with COVID, one of the things we keep hearing is, how can we train remotely and still be able to have that deep situational understanding of where our reps are at. Things like being able to track in augmented and virtual reality are a great tool to be able to accomplish that. And we're working with clients daily on helping them determine how best to achieve their training ROI goals with tools such as augmented and virtual reality. And this is typically a very customized type of process. But what everyone's finding is that these types of virtual reality and augmented reality reporting tools are invaluable in terms of you can't necessarily track all of these things with your traditional methods. We're recreating these as close to real life as possible. So everything from minutes on message, knowledge of product, even script lists can be built into the scenarios that we're providing, so that we're getting this type of real world data back. And even the best reps that are out there have some elements of their sales process in which maybe they're a little bit uncomfortable about, or maybe they could use a little bit of improvement on. And these aspects can really be highlighted throughout their training for reinforcement and future practice. And it's ultimately these real world type of war games that really help sharpen our best rep and even a struggling rep into their full potential, which really is our goal, is to get those behavioral changes in the real world. And we love virtual and augmented reality to really paint that full picture of where our reps are at and where do they need that type of reinforcement. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass it over to Patrick, and Pat's going to walk us through a couple of quick a quick case study in regards to one of our clients and how they utilized virtual reality and tracking to accomplish some of their goals.
Thanks, Sean. So in this short case study, we want to outline an example of how a VR experience can grow within a pharmaceutical organization and ultimately result in the need to track engagement within an experience. This application has been evolving for the last 3 years and is continuing to grow and be leveraged throughout the organization at various levels. This particular VR virtual reality experience was originally intended as a standalone one-time showcase for an HCP event with very limited tracking capabilities built in. The VR initiative was incredibly successful at this event, and the client decided to expand upon the app and use it in other areas with other audiences. So it expanded from the number of products to the number of indications, as well as in this phase, it was created as a more standalone, comprehensive suite of content. It was also leveraged by some global partners, as well as converted to iPad training. So the reach was going beyond virtual reality into a more 360-degree type of experience as well. So our client continued to see success after all of these additional improvements, both in the interest and demand for VR experience. And in the last year, it's expanded to be used even further. As you can see here, some additional indications, the expansion into a WebGL 360-degree experience. And then more importantly, they started to incorporate it into their baseline training curriculum for new hires, different groups, and launch workshops. So all of this led up to the need for some tracking and some analytics. So as this initiative continued to grow in the organization, it wasn't until it became part of this baseline training that the stakeholders began asking questions like, well, how often are people using this experience? Are they completing the training? And what are people actually interacting with when they're doing this experience? So our team went back to the application and revamped everything to leverage existing interactivity to track learner engagement. And in doing so, we answered all the questions that our client had by creating a series of custom dashboards within our Realities Campus platform. These dashboards helped our clients' key stakeholders visualize the engagement data for each module within the virtual reality experience. So now that the key stakeholders have the visibility to how learners are interacting with this experience, they have more teaching moments to talk to their reps about how they can improve. They're identifying learning gaps in the training as well. So with all of this current information that they're gathering, they've started to develop the next level of their training for their virtual training and make experiences and make enhancements, to new modules and experience to leverage more tracking and metrics, like some of the examples we've shared earlier, to better measure their learners' performance. So I mentioned the campus platform. I'm going to turn it over to Evan for a little bit more information on that.
Thanks, Patrick. Tipping Point Media has developed a tool that can work alongside any LMS or even independently to address this gap in tracking AR and VR specific data. It is built with the customization in mind so that users can look at the metrics, data, results, and information that's going to matter to your organization. Campus began at its core with building an AR and VR tracking program that is designed to give you insight into how users are interacting within a given virtual reality or augmented reality experience. We identified a gap in our clients that were early adapters of VR and AR, which was, how do I measure what is happening in an AR VR experience? And that's how we began building Campus as a complete system to address the question, how do I track all of this stuff that's happening in the AR and VR experience for my learners? If you think about it, it's an inevitable question, because as stakeholders that are in charge of training or directors of instruction and curriculum, they need to know the return on investment after they have developed and implemented a new type of training. They needed to be able to identify the metrics that say, this is working and here's why, or this needs reinforcement and here's why. And we build our AR and VR experiences to fit the educational needs of the learner. And that's foundational to who we are. So we developed Campus to help organizations fill in a gap that had not been yet addressed with AR and VR. And that's evaluation. Campus metrics, as I said, are 100% customizable, and they work with any LMS to track progress, completion, movement, behaviors, everything that we've talked about, and even physiological data. Campus gives you insight into how your learners are interacting within an AR, VR experience by offering a dashboard view with baseline metrics like experience completions per day, or even more granular data like the average time spent per learner per section. I'm going to hand the mic back to Patrick to take you through some of our highlights of the Campus solution.
Thanks, Evan. Tim, if we can make me the presenter here. So what I'd like to do is just give everybody a quick tour of the Campus platform that we have here. The Campus dashboards we have in our demo environment, which is mainly used for QC purposes during the application development. The majority of the data that we're going to be seeing is anonymous data, so we are able to share that, but some of the more intricate data collected, like some of the stuff we've been discussing earlier, is tied to specific users, so we really can't share that publicly. The TPM Campus platform is password protected, so it's only being accessed by the stakeholders in the organization that need it. We are able to add, any number of admin stakeholders that do need access to this. So what we have here for you, the first thing is the left-hand navigation on the left side here. This is the main location for all the experiences connected to the platform. If an experience has individual sections, such as this VR suite that we have here, they can be included as sub-menu links that have their own individual dashboards and reporting. It's also important to note that the campus can connect to anything like your AR, VR, mixed reality experiences, or even some 360 type video experiences delivered via iPad or web. And the menu grows as you add more experiences to it, so it becomes a central hub for everything. On the screen here, this is sort of a roll-up, gives the stakeholder a high-level overview of the data for a given experience, inclusive of all the individual sections within an experience or an application. The activity panel shows the total number of sessions launched by users, how many total users are using the application, and how many new users have used the application for the first time in a given time period. The time panel shows overview of how time is being spent within the experience, from the total time spent across all users, the average minutes per session, and the average minutes per user. And then a daily breakdown over here on the left-hand side, right-hand side, excuse me, of the total sessions per day shows you when the application is being utilized during the week. If an experience has individual sections like the one that we have here, we do break down the application by which individual sections are being accessed the most, and which sections are most popular with users. Towards the bottom here, we have an overall access and completion breakdown. So at a high level, we know where users are spending the most time and which experiences are being completed and started. So if we wanted to look for more detailed information on a particular module, we can go into one of the individual sections that we see here. And so on this dashboard, we can see the overall access and completion that we previously saw. This is something that we like to pull through on all of our dashboards for a level of consistency to keep it easy for people to use. On the right-hand side here, we can also see the expected time to complete this particular module, as well as the average time spent per user. This gives us some insight into if users are rushing through their content or if they're taking their time in the virtual environment. A lot of these modules can have an exploratory element to them, so it's not your typical linear progression of do A, do B, do C. There's a, so they could take some time to explore. In this particular module, there was an element of riding an ATV, so there was time that they could spend doing that activity. So then the remaining charts on the screen are some specific question interactions that are presented to the learners in the experience. On the left side here, we do have a help option that we present to learners, and if they select yes, then the experience auto answers the question for them if they want to keep moving, or if they know the answer and they just want to keep advancing. But if they select no, then the experience allows them to actually go in and attempt to answer the question correctly. On the right-hand side, we've got if users answer incorrectly, if it's the first attempt, the second attempt, or if they're maxing out their attempts and getting the question incorrect. So we can also detail modules that have a lot of multiple sections within them. So on this next section here, we can see, again, our overall access and completion that we've seen. Our overall access and completion that we've seen previously, as well as our time to complete the module and the average time spent. But what's different about this section here is that this does have a series of mini sections built within the larger module. So what we've done is we've detailed, the access per section of each of these mini modules, as well as the expected and average time spent within each of them. And then what we've also done is broken this down even further. So we can see, similarly to the larger modules, the overall access and completion for each of these mini sections. This all contributes to the completion of this diagnosing and grading section. And then towards the bottom here is some more interaction data, where this is kind of tracking the amount of times that specific symptoms within a classification of uveitis have been interacted with. So there's a lot that can be done with these dashboards. A lot of this data that you're seeing now is very simple interactions, but as I mentioned before, some of the more detailed data that we do collect for these types of experiences is tied to learners, so I'm not able to share all of that with you. But it's just a small sample of what we can do and what we're able to do with this campus platform and the experiences that we build. So we're starting to get close to the end of starting to get close here. I'm going to pass it back over to Sean. Tim, if you want to make Sean the presenter again.
There you go, Evan. Patrick, thank you. And Sean, back to you.
Okay, yep. Thank you, Pat. And now that we've had the opportunity to discuss, the current landscape, what can be tracked, the value of tracking in augmented and virtual reality, along with some use cases. And what we're going to do now is open it up to questions and really get some feedback from your teams. I know that we went kind of fast. I know we only have an hour, and a lot of cases, something like even behavioral tracking can be an hour unto itself. So, we left ourselves about 15 minutes here, it looks like, to answer your questions. And let's take a look at some of the questions coming in. Okay, let's see, we got one comment. Oh, that's a comment. Fascinating, love it. Awesome, thank you for the feedback. How long does this take to implement? That's a really good question. And with what you're gonna find with virtual reality types of projects or augmented reality types of projects is, it can vary. And it can vary from, in terms of, putting your tracking and reporting in, everything from a couple of weeks to a couple of, maybe even up to let's say even 2 months. It's really dependent on what we're doing, how complex it is, and at what stage of the process that we're implementing it. I mean, one of the things that we'll do up front is spend a lot of time with our clients to make sure we're capturing all their goals up front, and that will also help us to kind of shorten that curve in terms of the ability it takes to do the implementation. Okay, we got some more questions coming in here. Mentioned that Realities Campus integrates with LMS. What does that look like? What does that mean that the VR experience is launched from an LMS? So can you launch the VR experiences from an LMS? The answer to that is, in some cases, we are able to integrate it with an LMS. And what we're finding is there's varying degrees of LMS's capabilities depending on what the LMS is. The other thing that we're oftentimes seeing, and challenges that we're seeing with current LMSs is, they're not able to track all these different aspects of these endpoints that we're putting into these virtual reality experiences. And being able to visualize some of that too is another key area that a lot of them are tracking with. And typically the way that we'll handle this situation is, and whoever your vendor is, set up your calls early, get out in front of it early. Have your vendor talking to your person who's designing, the person who's designing your VR experiences, have them talking to your LMS early. And so in some cases you can, in some cases you've got to use outside systems. And that's really where our campus system has been birthed, is, there is that need out there for that deeper reporting. So how do you connect tracking to AR experiences? Do AR experiences need to be developed in a specific way to interface with campus? No, not necessarily. I mean, when you're developing the interfaces from an augmented reality standpoint versus a virtual reality standpoint, for sure there's going to be some different ways that we're going to go about the interactions, right? I mean, you can't necessarily see your hands in with things like augmented reality, but there are ways that we are able to develop around those scenarios and connecting them as something that we've got a lot of experience doing. And we're getting a bunch more questions in. Let's see. How do you connect? Answered that one. How receptive are learners to having their movement and heart rate tracked? Are legal concerns ever raised about companies that are doing this type of tracking today? We really haven't run across any type of that legality pushing back in terms of things like heart rates. Certainly there can be some concerns If there are concerns, there are ways that we can even kind of hide the data so that we're not even sharing that individual's reps maybe necessarily get our health information back. And what that really is just a matter of working with your teams again up front to kind of understand where they feel comfortable. Although, like I said, we haven't run into that yet. I'm sure that probably will come up at a certain point. And again, knowing that up front can certainly allow us then to be flexible in terms of how we're delivering that data, because more often than not, we probably still will be able to capture the data. We may not necessarily be able to tie it back to an individual if that is a legal concern. Do you need headgear, or would an iPad, iPhone suffice? That's a really great question. You don't necessarily need headgear. We're creating these types of portal experiences with augmented reality where, let's say, for example, a rep is sitting in his home office. He can now drop a door in front of him, pick up his iPad, or pick up his iPad, drop a door in front of him in his home office, step forward through that door, and it's almost as if he's been virtually transported into that doctor's office, and he's able to go through all these different types of reactions. And the nice part about how we're building these are, and this is something that a lot of our clients are asking for right now, because everyone's dealing with COVID, not everyone's back in the office. So we're seeing a lot of clients that are asking for these types of hybrids where we may create the experience in virtual reality for home use, but because we're building in this program called Unity, we're able to take that same experience that we're recreating and recreate that for a virtual reality headset. So now when they're going into, back to the headquarters office, or they're doing their in-person training, we're able to leverage both technologies. Let's see. Any feedback on learner privacy concerns? That's kind of similar to the one that, we've already mentioned. Again, most of the systems we're building out are customized. We do have some off-the-shelf systems. Our standard type of off-the-shelf campus is more of that standard type of reporting. So you can absolutely do a lot of this really great reporting and tracking without even getting into any personal information, if you would so choose.
Yeah, Sean, and just on top of that, like you said, a lot of that off the shelf stuff, it all is anonymous data. A lot of what I shared today, that was all anonymous data as well. So you can see that even if we aren't tracking to the actual learner level of data, we still have the ability to track a ton of data just by looking at completion rates and things like that. And I know that that's kind of some of the more simpler data to track, but it's still very useful just the same. So, anonymous data can get almost as much as personalized data.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, Pat. And, you heard in Pat's case study that he discussed with everyone that, we're running oftentimes these solutions where they can start out either in training or in marketing. So, having data that's coming back that, at times needs to be anonymous type of data, there's still a lot that we can pull and report on without even having to identify that with, let's say, a particular individual, or even in some cases, we do a lot of things like patient education, removing that individual patient's, identifying data to be able to suffice any type of legal concerns. Are your clients investing in headsets for individual learners? Another really great question. So the answer is yes. I want to say when we first got started in, virtual reality, we were pretty much well utilizing the desktops and the applications that were plugged into computers, and it was a kind of a cumbersome thing. Nowadays, there are absolutely great headsets that are standalone headsets that are literally plug and play. And for $300, you can send these out to your reps. They can have their own headset. We have plenty of clients that are utilizing it. We do also have clients that are, sharing headsets. They're utilizing technologies such as like CleanBox, and Tipping Point has a lot of ways that we've developed over the years to make sure that even things like COVID can be removed and cleansed from these headsets. So there's a lot of potential in terms of how you can go about getting the headsets in front of everyone. One of the things that our team has and a lot of experience in is going in and also making sure when we are sending headsets out for individuals, how do you manage those programs and how do you keep them up to date? And we've got a lot of experience in kind of acting as that really kind of go between the hardware companies and our final applications, and making sure they get into the hands of the users and that it's done in a really smooth fashion. Let's see what, okay, so we've got a bunch more questions coming in here. How is campus set up? Does the setup need to be done by TPN developers, or can setup and maintenance be done by internal development teams? So go ahead, Pat.
I can take that one. Yeah, typically what we do is we would do the initial setup. Typically we would work with any of our clients' internal IT teams to determine hosting requirements, things of that nature. The campus is structured and set up to run either on, sort of our hosting platforms or internal platforms if that is required. But we would, do the setup ourselves and then hand it off to the internal team to kind of, manage and maintain.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So we have, let's see, we got some more questions that are coming in here. A lot of really great questions. How is the haptic technology coming along? Another great question. So, in terms of things like your haptic gloves and haptic devices, it really depends on what you're looking to do, depending on if we are going to make the recommendation to use the haptic glove or a haptic device versus not utilizing it. In terms of things like shaking controllers, and we talked about using haptics for things like muscle memory, they're absolutely great at that. I think when you start to look at some of the haptic devices that are out there in areas where I see a lot of improvement coming in probably within the next year or so, or the kind of fine motor skills that I know, let's say, a lot of our clients are looking for, especially maybe more so on the medical device side. And this is where having that really sound instructional approach and a lot of experience comes into play. And I can't stress this enough. If you are thinking about utilizing a virtual reality vendor, choose someone that has a lot of experience in the space. I know virtual reality, and you heard me use the term flavor of the month. We hear it from a lot of first-time clients that are coming to us that, hey, we designed this and we're not getting the results that we've wanted. Knowing how and when to apply technology is kind of a challenge for a lot of teams that maybe just started doing it within the last couple of years because, quite frankly, they're forced to. And that's something that we really kind of bring to the table from the tipping point side, knowing to say, okay, maybe we can't do the fine stitching or have that type of haptic feedback where you're pressing on, let's say, a piece of the skin and getting that type of response that you want. Well, how do you approach that? And that's where we really shine in terms of coming up with creative ways that work. We're not just saying, hey, we're going to make a recommendation here because it sounds good on paper. No, we've tried it, we've done it, and that's that's the best way of going about it. I mean, but haptic gloves and haptics are certainly something we're excited about. That technology is only going to get better. I mean, when you see just where the headsets alone have come from just within the last couple of years, the haptic devices are really going to get there, and they're going to get there pretty quickly. Okay, see, we've got a couple more questions coming in. Okay, so here's one. What motivated your clients to start this type of tracking? And, it's really a neat type of basis, right? We're introducing new tools that are, relatively new to training and even the marketing aspect of virtual and augmented reality. And, we now have the ability to give that deeper insight into it. And, just looking at incorrect or correct answers as if we're doing a standard type of e-learning really is you're making the investment in these technologies. Why not get the most out of all of these scenarios? Let's create these so that your learners are going to come in and they're going to get the most out of them. Augmented and virtual reality aren't the cheapest ways of going about training, but they oftentimes are the most effective way. And that's where getting that deeper understanding of this type of reporting really starts to become valuable, and that's where a lot of our clients are looking to track in that manner of.
Yeah, Sean, and then just to add on to that, I mean, just using the example from our case study just a couple minutes ago, That client in particular, they came to us to build a VR experience for, a one-time use. Like tracking wasn't even in the conversation, but they saw how well it was received and then just continued to build and build and build. And then, like you said, at a certain point, somebody's going to ask the question of, well, how long are they spending? What are they doing in that? So all it takes is that one person to ask about that type of data to really start the conversation and start the process for tracking in these types of scenarios. So while in the case study, they kind of went back to tracking after the fact, it's a really good process to think about tracking and measuring going into the development of the experience, because that's when you can really build some really rich tracking just based on the interactions. So, in that example, we kind of had to go back and retrofit tracking onto the existing onto the existing interactions, excuse me. But just the same, if we come at it from the beginning, it really is just the conversation of wanting to do the tracking and knowing that you can is just part of it as well.
We're running out of time. We've got a bunch more questions to jump through here, so we're going to try and get through these rather quickly. Can the haptic gloves also be used to measure heart rate and nervousness? I'm trying to think of some of the newer gloves that are out there. I know that they are putting different elements into it. Pat mentioned things like Apple Watches, different types of wearables. We're probably seeing more of the wearables like Pat mentioned, I guess the Apple Watches. There's different bands that are out there that are varying degrees of cost that can also be utilized. Pat, anything you want to kind of tack onto that?
No, I mean, from the gloves themselves, I guess it really all depends on the type of glove and the specs that they offer.
Yeah.
It's like any piece of hardware. You can get a laptop with 8 gigs of RAM or 32 gigs of RAM, or this type of camera, that type of camera. So it really does depend on if the manufacturers are putting those types of sensors into the haptics gloves themselves. Because if they're not, and that's something you're looking for, then you're going to start to go down the path of trying to incorporate 2 sets of hardware within what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in talking about hardware, we've got closets full, we call it the graveyard here, of haptic devices, headsets that promise the world. Make sure you're doing your due diligence up front to really understand what you're buying, or find a vendor who does a lot of their a lot of testing for you, so you're not going through those pain points. But something that we do is just about every new thing that's out to the market, we have them in, we're testing them, and before we ever make a recommendation to a client, or it ever gets anywhere near a client, it's put through its paces. So making sure you've got a good understanding of that up front, and choosing a vendor that has a type of experience is something we would really recommend. Okay, so we're at the 1:30 hour here. Let me see. Are there any? Yeah, there's a bunch more questions. You know what? If we didn't get to your questions today, feel free to reach out to either myself or Patrick. I'd be happy to set up time to talk with everyone. Yeah, it looks like there's definitely a handful more questions. We would love to talk to you about these types of solutions. This is what we're really passionate about here at Tipping Point. We love creating solutions that really have that deep impact with our learners, let it be either internal or external for that matter. So we'd love to talk about how we can create these solutions for you, and how we can achieve all of your goals that you're looking to achieve. So feel free to reach out. Thank you everyone for joining here today. And yeah, we hope to talk to everyone soon.